In recent years, a major topic of early modern economic history has been the divergence between Europe and Asia. Historians have tended to highlight changes internal to Europe, such as new energy sources supporting enterprise. Also, Europe's often predatory relationship with other regions are explored. New forms of business organization, including those which added the integration of economies, might appear to be a sign of European success in cultivating dynamic enterprise. However, European rulers might have been compelled to respect private property rights internally, but this was accompanied by expropriation overseas and the use of force. The following lecture will at first depict early modern European expansion from the Iberian Peninsula of the 16th and 17th century in comparison to Dutch and English expansion of the 17th and 18th century. In the Middle Ages, continental associations like the Hanseatic League dominated trade in North and Baltic seas. Also, the Italian republics of Genoa and Venice dominated in the Mediterranean Sea even during the 16th century. But as the late Middle Ages progressed, the spice route from Asia was virtually blocked for the Christian powers. Expansionist aspirations of the Portuguese infant Henry the Navigator led afterwards to the exploration of the east coast of Africa. The Portuguese expeditionaries there set up factories, military posts, and trading enclaves. From these, they partially controlled the Atlantic trade routes for resources, goods, and slaves from Africa, and, after Vasco da Gama's voyage, the Indian Ocean. At the same time, Cabral began the Portuguese expansion into Brazil. The Portuguese monopoly in African, Indian, and Asian waters sparked strong competition with the Spanish crown of Castile. As their respective overseas expansion ventures progressed, various treaties were concluded to settle their competing claims and delimit their respective areas of navigation and private trade. The arrival of Christopher Columbus in America in 1492 opened new markets for the Crown of Castile. Access to and exploration of raw materials as rich as gold or the coveted spices allowed the access of people eager to participate in the lucrative business. The process of expansion and settlement of the population and the establishment of trade circuits was articulated in a system centralized in a cardinal institution for the interests of the Spanish monarchy. The Spanish state protected the interests of businessmen and merchant traders with business in America against the interference of other private individuals and foreigners. This commercial lobby was the driving force behind the organization of two fleets that covered the route between Spain and America each year. The much demanded precious metal was sent by convoys back to Europe and was additionally used for the exchange of Asian goods. In 1580, the integration of Portugal into the monarchy of Spain created a vast empire with dominions in all parts of the world, although each crown retained its sovereignty, economic autonomy, and mercantile structure. Both crowns would see their trade routes cut off in the face of corsair attacks and piracy by the English and Dutch. After 60 years of shared existence, the War of Restoration separated their interests once again in the middle of the 17th century. At the same time, the Iberian empires were facing rivalry from aggressive intruders, particularly England and the Dutch Republic. Commercial incentives for Dutch merchants to seek new routes to purchase goods from the Far East were further reinforced by the strategic desirability of interrupting Iberian traffic during the Dutch War of Independence from the Habsburg Empire. In 1602, diverse enterprises amalgamated in a new organization, the United Dutch East India Company. This organization followed Iberian precedents insofar as the Dutch States General endowed it with considerable monopoly privileges, but differed by being funded through joint stock equity funding. The company was very successful in enlisting private investment. Despite this, it was closely associated with the Dutch state, pursuing its war aims aggressively in the Far East by conquering Portuguese bases. Violence was not only used against European rivals. The United Dutch East India Company became a territorial ruler, managing slave-based plantations, for example, in today's Indonesia. The relationship between the Crown and the English East India Company was in comparison less close than that between the United Dutch East India Company and the Dutch States General. What distinguished the English East India Company from most other companies was its joint stock. Members were constituted as freemen, granted participatory rights to meet in a general court and vote for company governors. This difference in organization was reflected too in the EIC's commercial strategy as compared to the aggressive Dutch company. The EIC's inability to prevent its agents in Asia from trading independently ultimately became an asset, expanding its network so much so that the practice was formally permitted. This again in contrast to the Dutch company. Only in the second half of the 17th century did the EIC acquire rule over extensive trading settlements like Bombay, beginning its gradual shift into a territorial power in India. Central and Eastern European countries, having an agricultural structure relying on serfdom of large parts of the population, did, except for Russia's continental expansion in general, not have colonies. However, these countries were integrated in Western Europe's trade by export of cheap raw materials and goods in exchange for goods from outside of Europe. Although the early modern period saw important innovations in global enterprise that foreshadowed later developments in business organization, there were differences between those days and today. For instance, its military and political functions would later make the English East Indian Company appear outdated, a private company intruding in the proper sphere of the state. In the 19th century, the company absorbed its Indian territories into the British Empire.